So I think we're just waiting for a few more people to join, then we can get started. Great. Excellent. Hi, welcome to our webinar, Gear Up and Take Off. Excited you could join us today. I'm Cindy Hunter, VP of Client Strategy at Magnitude. With all the uncertainty going on about the new normal, we're all trying to figure out strategies that will help us to continue to move our businesses forward. I'm pleased to be joined by two expert leaders who have a history of helping companies hit their growth goals. Please join me in welcoming Natalie Nathanson, President and Founder of Magnetude Consulting, and Harvey Morrison, CEO and Founder of Marion Square. If questions arise during the presentation, please jot them down in the Q&A tab and we'll cover them at the end. Take it away, Natalie.
Great, thank you, Cindy, and thank you, everyone. So glad to be connecting with all of you today and joined by my friend and sales counterpart, Harvey. It's great to see a good turnout, see some more people coming in as we're talking. And before we dive in, I just wanted to take a moment and emphasize how we're planning to orient today's topic. So we're talking about the key components to fuel the sales and marketing engine. And these elements really stand the test of time. But given this kind of real and constant change that we're all experiencing in today's environment, as Cindy mentioned, we're also planning to share insights into what we're hearing, seeing, doing to be successful in today's environment. And as much as I may dislike the term new normal, I can't help but use it. I think the reality is that many of the shifts and adjustments we've all had to make these last few months in how we work aren't going anywhere. And there are some fundamental shifts taking place in how we do business, how we make decisions about where we place our dollars, what investments we make to drive our company's growth. And not only to stabilize businesses and be in survival mode, so to speak, but really how to grow our firms and companies, and in some cases be able to use this as an opportunity to really accelerate the growth trajectory. So Harvey, is there anything else you'd like to add here before we dive in?
Hey, thanks, Natalie. I did want to say it's nice to be here, and I would really just echo your sentiments that I think we're truly operating in a new environment, and those companies which are succeeding are those that are, I think, quickly embracing this new norm and exploiting new markets and opportunities. And most importantly, I think they're not waiting for business to return to normal or as it used to be. I think the topics that you've outlined and we're going to cover during the session today are timely, and it'll be very informative for the companies looking to thrive in this new environment and markets. Yeah,
certainly. And, really in terms of what we're planning to cover today, we have about 45 minutes for the content, and we want to leave time for Q&A at the end. So planning to set the stage a bit and talk about what we're seeing in today's landscape, and then really dive in and talk about the customer, budgeting, infrastructure, and staffing. And so, before we dive in and talk about just what we're seeing in the ecosystem at large, we did want to just get a feel of, from those of you who are on the webinar today, what are you experiencing and what are you grappling with? So I'm going to turn on the poll here and ask you each to take a moment, read through the questions, and I'll share some of the responses. Give it another 30 seconds or so for the responses to finish coming in. Great, looks like pretty much everyone has responded, maybe a couple that have not. So just to share some of these results, you can see different responses across the board, but I think it aligns with a lot of what we're seeing, right? Companies are focusing on that stability and looking at how to keep their business kind of healthy and strong through this landscape. But also companies pursuing new opportunities, and 42% is a sizable amount given everything that's taking place in the landscape today. I know, speaking personally, of seeing that and feeling that in our client base and just other conversations that are happening in the marketplace. So I think that sets a nice backdrop. And Harvey, why don't I pass it over to you to talk a little bit about what we are seeing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What type of environment are we operating in today is a question that we get asked a lot. And if you look at the overall data coming back from the market, it can be somewhat confusing at times. On one hand, you see stats like 50% of companies have reduced their budgets. As you've noticed, GDP has dropped historical amounts. Unemployment is really at all-time highs. But on the other hand, you have news that comes out like 24% of companies have increased their budgets and plan to spend. And if you look specifically at the software industry, deals closed by software companies are up 14% over pre-pandemic levels. So overall, I think what the market is telling us, from what I've seen working with companies and conversations I've had over the last several months, is we're firmly in a new norm, and there are opportunities to win new customers and really grow your business exponentially in this environment. But really what it's going to take is, I think what your poll just showed there, and I was glad you did that, is it's really going to take focus, proper targeting, which I know we're going to talk about, and most importantly, I believe, a willingness to explore and embrace new ways to go to market. At Marion Square, we help companies get into the government space, and there's a lot of companies that have come to us today or over the last few months that before it said, hey, we're never really going to go into the government space, or it never really was a thought for us, that are now open and willing to be able to explore and look at how do I potentially get into this space. So I know we're going to talk about this more, but again, I think bottom line is there are opportunities out there. Businesses are spending, companies are growing and adding new clients. It's just up to how do you go after that market and how do you execute?
Yeah, I think those are all really important points. And I think this notion of, surviving versus kind of thriving, certainly not to undermine the hardship that a lot of companies are going through or have gone through, depending on the sectors that they serve and the offering. But I think it's very encouraging to see, so many companies successfully at this point using this as a real kind of opportunity to grow their business in new ways, and kind of that forcing function to look at the market differently, or the sectors differently than maybe we have before. So there are a lot of complexities, as many of us know, within the marketing and sales functions, and lots of moving pieces as kind of sales and marketing as individual functions, and then how they need to come together to really drive that kind of growth engine. But put as simply as possible, we talk about 3 levers for go-to-market, is around who do you target, what do you say, and how do you reach them? And we've always talked about it this way. And not only has this framework stayed just as relevant in today's environment, but I'd argue it's more critical now than ever to revisit each of these areas. And speaking from my own experience too, from looking at our own firm's business these last 5 months or so, as well as alongside our clients, and helping clients kind of navigate changes in their go-to-market plans. That statistic that Harvey mentioned, around 96% of companies shifting their go-to-market. There's a lot of downstream implications of all of that across across each of these areas. And I recognize that depending of the state of your business and the markets that you serve and the company's kind of maturity in the landscape, you might be in different places. But everyone should be looking at kind of the market level. Who are you selling to? What are the types of companies that need your solution? What are the roles in the organization that will actually pay attention and do something about solving the problem that you help solve? And then are there different segments of the market to prioritize? As Harvey said, companies that sell into private sector now might be looking at government, and there's real opportunities there. So how can you evolve your offering to cater to potentially very different sectors than today? We have a CEO of a tech development shop, just to give you an example, that went from selling a fairly horizontal offering across sectors up until the pandemic to now, a few months ago, really honing in on the nonprofit sector specifically. And within that, focusing in on museums, botanical gardens, and other kind of in-person nonprofits to really help them build touchless, tech guest experiences. It was a small segment of their customer base, and you wouldn't necessarily think to nonprofits as a primary in times like this, but they've really capitalized on it and served a really valuable need in today's market. So just to give you one example, and then that permeates through kind of who you're targeting, how you talk to them. So the message around how you clearly and succinctly articulate the unique value of the solution and ensure that that's in the value of the target market. And lastly, the mechanism. So this is where the tactics and the execution really come into play. How do you reach and engage your prospects? And this is across both sales and marketing. How should sales be pursuing opportunities? What are the right types of marketing campaigns to utilize to reach the audience? And this area has also changed a lot. There's companies that relied heavily on trade shows for their lead generation to now needing 100% digital lead generation, and reps shifting to 100% remote selling. So there's really a lot that underpins all of this to reevaluate and rethink how you go to market. Harvey, is there anything else you'd like to add here?
Well, Natalie, I think I would just emphasize what we stressed earlier, and that is companies that are thriving in this environment today are actively exploring new markets for their products, are embracing new channels for business and revenue. So again, I think your point earlier, revisiting this triad of components and making sure they're relevant and up to date for your business is something that's really critical, and is an exercise that I think all organizations should be going through right now.
Yeah, thank you. And next, looking at the life cycle of a company, so to speak, we always advise clients to start with the end goal in mind and have the foundations in place before scaling up, while of course leaving enough flexibility to look at new paths and new opportunities in the market. And I think, whether a company is seeking a rapid exit or hitting certain growth milestones or other types of targets, the commonality among all of those is really most of the elements that get you there, even if the mix of activities and priorities looks a bit different. I think the interesting thing in today's climate is that this process or cadence is a bit more fluid now versus a clear upward trajectory as we might have seen previously. So for example, you might have already been in that scale-up mode, but now had so much change in your environment that you've had to move back down the pyramid, so to speak, and revisit your go-to-market, potentially your positioning and branding, your sales materials. And so, the final point I'll make just about how important it is to have the right foundations in place. And I get it. We know how hard it is and how tempting it is to skip over some of the foundations and some of the strategic analysis and jump right into execution. And I'd argue that skipping the foundations is even more costly now, because we can't really trust what worked in the past as a proxy for what we should be doing moving forward. And on top of that, as leaders, I think needing to make sure that your teams know where they're headed and that everyone's aligned on the priorities and the challenges. Harvey, do you want to talk more about that a bit?
Well, I mean, I think I can't agree with you more. Having this foundational plan in place is critical, because as you stated, everything from execution is built off of this plan. If you don't have a solid plan, your execution ends up being weak. The other point I think it would make is, and I think it's just as important as the time you spend developing the plan, is the time you spend to make sure you clearly communicate it and everyone clearly understands the plan and their role in the plan's success throughout the organization. As we like to say, excuse me, everyone in the boat needs to be rowing in the same direction. And if this isn't executed properly, I think you'll dramatically see a decrease in the overall effectiveness of your plan and the overall execution capabilities of your organization in general.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are all really important points, and I like that analogy of all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, and I think this slide is really a great illustration of how important it is to make sure everyone understands the plan and as we said, is rowing in the same direction. I work with a lot of technology companies, both large and small, and I've seen this conversation or tension that's highlighted in this slide that happens between sales and marketing play out, more times than I care to count. There just seems to be this constant tension in these organizations that don't have a solid plan, where folks aren't in lockstep and they don't work together. That continues to come up or bubble up between the sales and marketing organizations. And the types of conversations highlighted on the slide are typically what we hear or what we see. And I think, with that, it really, again, leads to the importance, or this tension dramatically highlights the need for proper alignment of the sales and the marketing team. Again, not just around corporate objectives, but more importantly around tactical items such as we're going to discuss, target markets and customers. And to ensure alignment across the organization, you need to have what we're calling, and we're highlighting in this, a market responsiveness loop, or really just a process that enables sales and marketing to quickly test new market hypotheses and ideas, get real-time feedback from the market and from the field, and then be able to incorporate this feedback to either drive really hard in the direction that we're going, or to realize, hey, this is a mistake, let's quickly pivot somewhere else. And the key is, everyone needs to be on the same page, working from the same plan in order to execute quickly and efficiently. So, everyone needs to be on the same page, but also, again, I think to stress is, if you don't have, it doesn't have to be a market responsive loop with everything we've got in here, but you need to have a process that sales and marketing have bought off on to put hypotheses in the field, rapidly test those hypotheses, get real-time feedback, and then be able to have the freedom to move and pivot as needed as an organization.
Yeah, and just to bring the point home with a couple of examples. So we have a client that sells compliance software into healthcare practices, and that's serving a market that's had to change a lot of practices recently, and they saw a need and an opportunity to serve their customers differently. So a few months ago, they worked quickly to launch an occupational safety offering, really help navigate medical practice reopenings. I am sure that this was, record time for them to go from concept to launch. So it was a new offering. They were targeting new roles within their target accounts. It happened that the old personas they sold to were office managers who were not presently in the office. So new messaging, new tactics to reach the audience. And just you can see how that need for sales and marketing to be very closely kind of aligned and intertwined, just how important that is. And another example is a company that sells to 4 key sectors, and very early on in the pandemic, we decided to really place almost all of the kind of sales and marketing efforts on targeting one sector in particular. It was their digital health, knowing that that's a sector that's flourishing and lots of opportunity and an increased need for their solution. So kind of went through and reassessed all the efforts, reprioritized both strategically and the tactics, and it's paying off, and saw their strongest Q2. So really looking at the right way to kind of put this into action and to make sure that you're making adjustments as you go and learning quickly from things that aren't working. All of that builds the success.
Yeah, Natalie, we've got an example from our perspective where we had a company we were working with that was really big in the commercial healthcare space, helping to look for data anomalies and identify waste and fraud. But with the pandemic and the money that has been doled out by the US government to help small businesses, there was a real need inside several of those agencies to be able to identify waste and fraud as well. And so we were able to help that company pivot with that pandemic and help them get into the government space and really capitalize on the need in that market.
Yeah, and that's a great example. And I know you've helped a number of companies kind of in this climate to get into the government and bringing really valuable solutions. That's great. All right, so now let's start going through these 4 key areas. The first is really about targeting and the ideal customer, and I want to stress just how critical it is to get this right. Without it, everything else falls apart. And we're not talking here about creating fancy personas and whatnot. It's really about knowing who you should sell to based on who has the needs and pain points that align with your solution. And in the current landscape, being realistic about who has budget that they can spend in a timeline that fits your own kind of organization's targets. Or, as we said, and as with Harvey's example, finding new markets to serve. So one challenge that we're seeing are companies that have not been close enough to the customer. And, if that's the case, how do you know which levers to push and pull on, who to target, how to reach them, what to say to them? And with so much changing in the landscape and in people's personal and professional lives, that importance of really authentically understanding your customer, their pain points, their needs and wants, that's where kind of the insights get uncovered around how to engage them, but also a lot of that kind of innovative and kind of out of the box thinking. And I think, another area is really around second point here, being stuck in the old ways of thinking. So in the context of the customer, it's really being open to rethinking, maybe how you deliver your product, how it's packaged or priced, as well as, who you sell it to. And then finally, really just, sales and marketing resources being spread too thin across too many different things, trying to be, too many things to too many people. And as Harvey mentioned, making sure everyone's has focus, has a plan, and is rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, Natalie, I would add here that, these are really the basic building blocks of any sort of sales and marketing organization. But the companies, we've worked with, you ask them, hey, when's the last time you've gone through a process or a program to really identify what's your ideal customer look like and who you're targeting? And some can't even remember the last time they've done it. They sort of get complacent or get lulled to sleep by, hey, we know who our target market is and we know who our target customer is, and we just keep going out there. And so I would really offer up that if you don't do this on a regular basis, you're probably going to be missing opportunities that could be open for both, your products or your services.
Yeah, and I think that complacency is an important notion, because I think I talk to a lot of CEOs, heads of sales, heads of marketing, and I don't think anyone is resting on their laurels today. So kind of moving beyond that complacency and looking at what is the right way to take action. So with that, it's really, what are those critical things to get right? And as we talked about, it starts with knowing your customer and being willing to retest your past kind of notions and hypotheses. And there's some of the kind of standard company parameters to look at, which companies and sectors are healthy and spending now. You can look by size, by kind of geography, things like that. And then there's also looking at the roles within the organization. So who's involved in the purchase process? Who do you prioritize in your targeting? And to Harvey's point, knowing that changes over time and is something that should be, revisited regularly. And just to give you kind of a tactical example of how we've seen this play out, we have a client that's always struggled with engaging the C-level. It's a security firm that sells to chief security officers, and the beginning of the pandemic decided to retest the notion that it was hard to reach them. We're hosting a big webinar and got a big spike in executive level kind of participation. And it's a very simple example, but just testing that and learning that had real implications on how navigated things these last few months, and the opportunities that presented to get in front of certain audiences. And then I guess the last point I'll make here is not to get so focused on kind of the company and role parameters at the expense of the bigger picture. And so looking at kind of when, where, and how to scale, it's important to remember you might want or need to revisit some of the bigger stuff, like your sales strategy and the model and the role that marketing versus sales should be playing in supporting that growth. So really kind of taking a hard look across a range of parameters. Next up here is budgeting. And before we jump in, we wanted to get a feel for the priorities facing all of you. So we'll pull up another poll here. I'll give you a minute to respond to that. You can choose all that apply in this case. Okay, another 10 seconds or so. I see most responses in. All right. So let's look at the results here. This is, I'd say this is in line with what I was expecting. There's really kind of lots of different needs, and depending on kind of the organization and where you are, looking at whether it's kind of refilling pipelines and building and maintaining those relationships in an environment that looks very different than what it did before. So I think this just emphasizes the onus to really look across all the different facets of the sales and marketing function and kind of make the right decisions on where to prioritize. And so, talking a little bit about typical industry benchmarks on the marketing side in particular, is that companies typically reinvest between 6 and 12% of their revenues into marketing. And this is made up of people, tools and technology, and third is out-of-pocket expenses like paid advertising, sponsorships, things like that. And in today's landscape, with most companies shifting their go-to-market, as you can imagine that all of you have been grappling with how to reallocate those funds and what that means for you. We're also seeing a lot of companies who have never really made formalized or robust marketing investment that now realize that it's more critical than ever in today's environment. And I'd say maybe close to half of our new clients over these last couple of quarters are really tackling marketing more formally because of what's happening in the market, and it pays off. Seeing kind of really good feedback. And then, looking at just spend overall, an industry report cited that over 50% of marketers have increased their spend during this time frame, and an additional 15 to 20% had no change. It was more of a reallocation of where they're spending. And then, within that, there's some variations that you might expect depending on the sector. So, it makes sense when we think about it that there's kind of an increased reliance on marketing to fill the pipeline, to rework value propositions, get the message out in an efficient way. And I think validates kind of some of the areas that showed up in the poll, that it is around the targeting and developing new communication channels and things of that nature. Harvey, do you want to comment on the sales perspective in terms of budgeting decisions?
Well, I think I would say, as most organizations know, salespeople are typically your number one cost in a sales organization. And, leadership needs to make sure, just like you're constantly reviewing your target market and your ideal customer profile, review your sales organization structure and your go-to-market model to ensure, you're optimizing your spend, one, but two, you're getting the greatest productivity out of the sales team. A great example is if you have a sales structure today that is optimized around, geography where, hey, I need a rep sitting in a particular city to be able to call on clients and prospects. Now that may not be the best rep, but it's the best rep I can find in that city. You may want to rethink that as more and more organizations are open to, virtual meetings, not getting together at conferences and those sorts of things. So you may be able to save some costs by not having an individual located in a certain city, and you may be able to even upgrade the talent. Instead of saying, hey, I'm looking for the best person or sales rep in this particular geo, I'm just looking for the best sales rep in general. So again, I think just revisiting, continually how you're going to market and how you're structuring your sales team can be very critical, not only from a cost perspective, but also from a productivity perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. So what are the right elements to focus on, build on that? We shared earlier this 96% of companies shifting their go-to-market since the pandemic. That's almost all of us. And that really does mean a shift in how we should spend and where we should spend it. And so as part of that, I think the first step is really looking at your current spend top to bottom, understanding how the investment choices line up with business needs and objectives, and then what that means in the short term, but certainly not being short-sighted, and really looking at, if in this new normal, what are the new paths to get where you're looking to go. And for example, are you finding the right ways to reach the folks in your target audience, and specifically those that have the greatest propensity to buy? Do you truly have visibility into where you're spending and what it's driving, and starting to understand kind of that visibility into metrics and closed loop performance? And I don't want to leave with the impression that this is all about tactics and all about kind of looking for those short-term wins and only generating leads. Of course, those are always important to a business, and in times like this, even more so. But we're also seeing companies really use this time and allocate budget to rethink their plans and their budgets strategically, and to use this as an opportunity in areas such as rethinking and up-leveling a company's digital presence and how they interact with their customers through all those different digital touch points. And then companies that are investing in reworking their brands, their positioning, again, not just to get through this time, but as we've touched on, to really use this as an opportunity to recalibrate and how you want to kind of show up there for your target market.
Yeah, Natalie, I think the one thing I would emphasize on this slide is, while there's a sales budget and there's a marketing budget, and the two should be separate. As you're planning programs in both sales and marketing, and as you're planning, money spend in both those organizations, one should be in lockstep and fully aware of what the other is doing. I think that's really going to help make the most and generate the highest return for the money that you're spending out of these budgets.
Yeah, and that goes back to that focus, and also requires, I think, having the right infrastructure and process in place, which is the next area that we're talking about. We sometimes refer to it as all the unsexy parts of the marketing and sales functions. So looking at the sales and marketing processes, technology, so CRM, marketing automation, other tools, making sure they're all kind of integrated and in support of your current workflows, remote environments in today's environment, and that give that unified view. And that's kind of getting into the metrics, and not metrics for reporting sake only, but really to give you that insight and visibility to help make better decisions. And things like process are always important, but another example of one of those areas that now can be revisited and make sure it's current with any changes in practices. And that your tools and technologies can really help support that increased reliance on digital. And we're seeing companies that consider themselves digital laggards that now realize just how important it is to have the right elements in place, like a strong and clean prospect database, an active and authentic presence on kind of LinkedIn for marketing and social selling, or whichever other social networks your target market might be on, things of that nature, and being realistic about what makes sense for an organization, and not being in such a rush to scale up that you kind of skip over some of these, getting some of these right basics in place, because as many of us know, over time, these Band-Aid solutions end up doing more harm than good. So see it as a fine line to walk between wanting to be kind of action oriented and quickly getting programs and activities underway, but also making sure there's the right kind of backdrop to support it.
Yeah, Natalie, one thing I would like to add is, outside of the people in the sales organization, your largest expense tends to be your tools. And tools, while they can provide a huge productivity boost to the organization, they can also become a major drain, cost drain on the organization, and time drain for that matter from the sales team perspective. So I think your point of make sure you have a plan. Don't invest in tools until you have the plan, and have a plan for how you're going to use them. And secondly, how are you going to track metrics and results, right? How are you going to know if the tool is delivering the desired outcome? Make sure you clearly understand that before you get into it, and don't fall into a trap of, we use this tool at my last company, so I'm sure it's applicable for my current company. let's just go buy it. Have a plan, have a key set of metrics you want to use to track success, and then follow those. And then just as importantly, I want to add on to this is, you're going to invest a lot in a tool. You're going to invest a lot in a plan. Make sure you invest just as much for employee enablement, because if employees can't use the tool to its fullest extent, you're not going to get the desired return. So you don't spend a lot of money buying a great tool and do a flashy job of rolling it out, and then really, go cheap when it comes to making sure everybody understands the value of the tool and actually how to use it.
Yeah, it's so important, and I think we covered a lot of this, but really, trying to figure out where do you start, right? What are the areas that might need attention, or you might not. And so I would say the recommendation, if you're not working with any kind of outside party, is to really put yourselves in the shoes of thinking like a consultant. So take that step back, take stock of what you have, where your gaps are, which processes need to be mapped kind of again or differently, like kind of a remote selling model or a different approach towards lead generation. And then what are these kind of Band-Aids that you may have had in place that might burst at the seams? And then being very realistic about, as an organization, what's your appetite to make these improvements, and being clear about whether that's kind of a stopgap and kind of a short-term solution, or kind of taking the time to put things in place the right way for the longer term. I'm going to keep moving just to make sure we leave enough time for the Q&A here. And staffing is last and certainly not least, it's such an important topic, and I would say arguably the place that requires the most difficult changes or shifts in practices, and for some companies really shift in mindset. So when we were talking about budgeting, we talked about people being the biggest cost across both sales and marketing. And really, when we take a step back and think about this, staffing decisions being so critical and so costly, it's really about managing and mitigating risk and making the right types of hires at the right time. So one of the riskiest moves we often see in kind of early stage or high growth companies is hiring staff too early or too quickly. And I would say that's not unique to this environment, but it is certainly exacerbated in this environment. One example is, the person who's highly skilled at managing a high performance team is not necessarily the one that's adept at looking at the market from a 300-foot view and rethinking the go-to-market the right way. or the person with expertise getting a new program in place and quickly, optimizing it is not necessarily the same skill set as the person who should be kind of managing an already proven tactic on an ongoing basis. So with so much changing in the landscape, the skill sets and the profile of the ideal hire might look very different than the ones you need today. Really kind of making sure you're putting the right people in place to make the right decisions, whether that's kind of in-house or an outside resource. Harvey, do you want to touch on some of these areas as well?
I would just echo the sentiments that you said. Is the cost of a bad hire, as everybody knows, I think sometimes far outweighs the cost of leaving a position vacant. So make sure you understand the skill sets that you need, and make sure you have a good checks and balance process in place as you go to the market and hire. Again, it's not something or a process that you can rush to get through. It really needs to be a thoughtful process with a lot of discussion to make sure the person you bring on is a good fit.
Yep. Yeah, certainly. And one thing we wanted to emphasize is, just as we've said about a number of areas to really re-examine, is thinking about that mindset around hiring and needs. And I think part of this is realizing that headcount is not always the answer. And there's really two critical needs I see in this landscape. One is strategically figure out what's needed and where to go, and then being able to quickly and expertly execute against that. So you want to be able to quickly prove something out or disprove it, but at that point knowing kind of what you need, and at that point you can keep going, or that's a good point to bring in staff and someone that can help manage that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for outsourcing everything by any means, and spent 10 plus years in in-house marketing roles before starting this firm. So I certainly know the value of a team, and a team that knows the product and the business inside and out. But simply to make the point that where there's so much changing in the landscape and so much to kind of prove out again, or kind of net new, keeping in mind that to test something, you want to make sure to have kind of the depth of expertise, or best in breed, so to speak, in each of the functional areas of marketing, and really understanding that that it's a very different set of skills across the different facets of the marketing function, and those all must come together the right way. So none of us are the experts in everything or have the skill sets everywhere. So really kind of putting the right elements in place. And Harvey, I know you work with a lot of clients similarly on the sales side around kind of assessing and vetting and quickly getting to new markets. Can you share some other perspectives here?
Yeah, I would just, again, agree with what you're saying. I've run sales teams in large organizations, corporately before, prior to starting Marion Square. And I think, having somebody who is an expert in the market guide you through launching in that market, maybe even doing a test run in that market. One, I think gets you into the market a whole lot quicker. And two, lets you clearly understand not only what the potential is for your product in that market, but helps you clearly understand what types of investments you're going to need to make in that market. So for example, we were working with a cloud company that wanted to get into the government space. They hired us to do a market assessment where we went out and sort of looked at, where are they buying solutions just like this? And then what are the requirements to be able to do it? And there was a big requirement that the organization was going to have to invest in order to hop into the government space. And once they found out what that requirement was and the time it was going to take to implement it, they decided that maybe that wasn't a market for them. But if they'd gone and tried to hire folks internally, spent 6 months getting ready to build things up, it would have been a big waste of money for them at that time. So, hiring outsourced headcount with subject matter expertise to at least canvas the market for you and give you an idea of the upside and give you an idea of the requirements, I think is always a good idea. And then you can grow your internal organization behind that.
Yep. Yeah. That is really important. And before we jump into Q&A, we kind of covered the big topics here. Just kind of brief introductions to our firms. Magnetude Consulting, we marketing firm, work with clients in kind of many of the different areas that we've been touching on today, both at that strategic level of looking at what should go into the go-to-market, how to stay kind of current and identify the right opportunities in the landscape, having those right foundations in place, that the brand, the messaging, the marketing plan itself, and then supporting the execution, oftentimes working alongside in-house marketing teams, but also sometimes being kind of the marketing function. And it's certainly a very interesting time right now to be working on this. So I feel like our brain powers have been firing on all cylinders these last number of months to put the right things into place.
Yeah, and I'm with Marion Square, and as it says at the top, we're a sales and business growth consulting firm. We really like to tout the fact that we're not just strategy, we're also execution. As Natalie talked about, we're able to roll our sleeves up and really get in there with clients to help them win business. Our focus has been helping technology organizations that want to explore and actually get into the federal government marketplace. So we not only build your strategy, assess the market, but we'll also help you identify opportunities, pursue opportunities, and actually close deals. So as Natalie had mentioned as well, our business has been has picked up quite a bit as organizations go into this pandemic that had originally not thought about the government space, are all of a sudden starting to see lots of opportunities in the government space, and we're helping to craft strategies and execute against those strategies and guide them to success.
Yeah, and I think for both of our firms, we can come in and kind of stay and grow and evolve with a company, but also can come in, help put the right things in place, help enable kind of an in-house team to kind of take the helm, and then kind of be on our merry way. Right before we go into your questions, we did want to mention a special offer for those of you on today's webinar. If you're looking for help to quickly benchmark where you are, identify those areas of issues or opportunities, we do have this rapid lightweight audit that looks at both sales and marketing collectively. And depending on kind of the level of investment, we are raffling off one rapid assessment, and we'll be announcing a winner via email that gets the audit free of charge. If you have any questions, you can follow up on that. But with that, let's jump into questions.
Great. Thanks, Natalie and Harvey, for all your insights. We've had a few questions submitted during the talk. The first one is, can you talk a bit about what technology tools are working, especially with the work from home situation?
Yeah, so Harvey, do you want to speak from the sales standpoint, and then I can talk on the marketing side?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. The big sales tools obviously we're seeing that are working are your Google Hangouts and your Zooms. And you notice Natalie and I actually got on face-to-face, or at least shared our face early on in the presentation. I think that's critical for sales reps and sales organizations to do, because a big part of a sales rep's job is to build a relationship with the client. And sometimes I think that's hard if there's no face-to-face interaction. So, tools that enable you to meet the client, to see each other face-to-face, I think are critical in today's environment in being successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the marketing side, I think there's lots and lots of different tools out there. I think for a lot of organizations we work with, it's really focusing on the basics to start, and really making sure that you have those kind of mastered, and as I touched on earlier, have that kind of a clean and accurate database, and that aligns with kind of the kinds of prospects you're looking to engage in this market. If you don't have a marketing automation system in place, this is a really good time to put that into place and to make sure that you have that visibility between kind of the CRM, the website, get a lot more kind of visibility into kind of search patterns and can build out kind of lead nurture workflows and things of that nature. There are many kind of purpose-built tools that can support kind of behavioral targeting and digital advertising. But I would say, honestly, oftentimes it's really kind of getting the foundational pieces in place that can go the furthest right now.
Great, thank you. And the next question, are there any specific direct sales techniques that are working better than others? So that question is for Harvey.
Direct sales techniques that are working better than others. I think the one thing we're starting to see that's helping, and I'm sure, folks are doing more and more of it, is, the outbound email stuff doesn't seem to be working to get interest and discussion. But we've seen organizations really build around LinkedIn and utilizing LinkedIn as a way to identify opportunities, make contacts with potential prospects, and working that way. The other thing that is starting to pop up that we're seeing more and more, while they don't have face-to-face conferences, there are more and more conferences that are coming up virtually. And we participated in one a few weeks ago where you actually got to schedule time to actually interact with some of the other participants. So I think, while you can't be there face to face, there are more and more of these that are popping up where you can schedule time to actually have conversations as, virtually, even though you're not there at the conference itself.
Great. And then, Natalie, I think this question is for you. Do you recommend speaking to the COVID-19 issue at this point in time, 5 months into the pandemic?
That's a good question. And hate to give the consulting answer of it depends, but I do think it really does. I think even kind of a month or two into this, I think people were a bit kind of weary and tired of hearing, COVID this, COVID that. But the reality is this is something that's kind of facing all of us and has real implications on, everything, right? It permeates personal and business lives. I would say if it aligns with your solution and you're in a market where kind of things are changing, manufacturing, anything kind of compliance or safety related, then by all means you should be. But I think otherwise, and maybe a little bit the way we've oriented today's topic is thinking in terms of this new normal of just understanding that those mission critical value propositions are more important than ever, and it's the way that you orient your marketing and sales efforts might have a different tone than it did 6 months ago, but you don't have to be kind of in everyone's face about that, so to speak.
Great. The next question is really for both of you. What are the new or most common talent development needs or deficits you are hearing about from your client companies?
Talent deficits. I can take that first, Harvey, if you'd like. I think one is, and we talked about kind of just the shift in marketing to more kind of digital practices, and this isn't new, right? Many organizations have been very digitally minded and digitally focused for years now, but I think now kind of the onus is on everyone to be focused there. I think companies that have a small marketing team or sometimes no marketing in-house or one person might be a fantastic generalist, but there's different specialized expertise that's needed to kind of effectively test a channel and to know that you've given it kind of the right execution behind it. So, Google AdWords, for example, we have staff on the team that's all they do. that one person that spent 10 years kind of only doing Google AdWords. And so expecting a strong marketing generalist to be able to bring the same acumen around testing and optimization and understanding the latest and greatest in that functional area is kind of the deficit, is I guess that trade-off between the specialization and kind of the functional expertise. And then I think any one kind of marketers has the purview of what what they see and what they've experienced. And in today's landscape, I think whether however you get information about what else is happening in the ecosystem around you is just making sure to be drawing on a larger pool of experiences.
Yeah, I think from the sales perspective, and at Marion Square, we help a lot of organizations out with this, is it's being able to clearly communicate the value of your technology to an organization when you can't really meet with them face to face. And a lot of times that's going to come from the written word. So, we're responding to, a request for a proposal. We're generating a proposal to send to a client, and we can't go sit in front of that client and clearly explain to them verbally, what we're proposing, how it works, and the value it's going to bring to the organization. So really working with the team to not just, I'll generate a proposal and take it to the client and just sit and talk to them about it and they'll get it. But really putting in the time and the effort to make proposals and presentations that you send over stand on their own and clearly articulate the value you're providing is something that organizations really, at least from a sales perspective, I think need to be working on and investing in with their employees.
Great. Just a couple more questions in these last few minutes. And this question is for Natalie. How effective are LinkedIn groups for marketing?
So this is my personal kind of opinion or experience. There are some LinkedIn groups that are effective and that are very active, tend to skew more towards kind of the niche kind of user group type of communities. But if you're talking about LinkedIn for kind of lead generation, for kind of revenue generating activities, it's not typically the first place or a place where we focus. It's a lot of kind of service providers and vendors in a lot of the LinkedIn groups that are looking to sell you something, which is why kind of everyone thinks about it. But to echo Harvey's point on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a very powerful platform for kind of the marketing side of demand gen and sales and selling. And so LinkedIn advertising is very effective in an area where kind of pre and kind of during the pandemic, and even more so today where people are in front of their computers, that would be the area that I would recommend focusing on, paired with kind of more of the sales minded kind of building relationships and looking at the right accounts to target and how do you kind of interact with them in a kind of one-to-many environment as well through your company's LinkedIn.
So that's a perfect segue to the next question. What are the most effective intro messages on Sales Navigator to connect with the person you would like to speak with? So from a selling perspective.
Yeah, I don't know the specific words that you lay out, but I will tell you, be upfront and honest with folks from a LinkedIn perspective. I've seen organizations try really quirky or kind of sly intros to get people to accept, and then the next thing you know, they're spamming you with all sorts of stuff that they really weren't expecting to receive from it. So, keep the approach short, keep the approach value focused, but overall keep the approach honest, so folks know what they get when they connect in with you.
Great. And then we have one more question at the very end. In the beginning of the year, we had headcount in the plan, but have held off. How do I make the decision on when to move forward with those hires?
So I can take that first from the marketing perspective, and I do think there are a lot of variables that go into that. So it's hard to say without kind of knowing any specifics about the environment. But I would say, a few of the areas to look at. One is kind of being clear about which mode your company is in. Are you in that kind of survival mode? Are you in that kind of new opportunity? Let's capitalize on this time and do so, and understanding kind of the cash position of the company and the health of the pipeline. So all of these factors. And then what's your track record these last few months? Are you still proving out whether kind of what you're doing is working? If so, I would say headcount can be risky because you don't know yet what you need, versus kind of you've got the right things in place, you're humming along, and you need more kind of manpower to execute in known places. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think it's all driven off the numbers, right? I don't think if your pipeline and your close rate supports new headcount, I wouldn't hire it from a sales perspective, right? But if your pipeline supports it and you're getting into new markets and deals are closing, then by all means, I wouldn't hold back. If you validated and tested that, hey, this is a new market and we're starting to win deals and we think we should expand, I would go into it, wholeheartedly.
Great. That is all the time that we have for today. So thank you, Harvey and Natalie. Thanks to our attendees. We'll be sending out the slides, the recording, and some additional resources to everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.